There's so much to say on this topic, and I think it's important to start with the fact that this mystery remains because of the fault of the United States government. Because of their lack of transparency, these questions have arisen. So to be sure, this is not your kooky conspiracy theorist talking on the internet about something that they read online on a discussion forum. These are real legitimate questions surrounding the status of America's greatest monetary asset.
JP Cortez, welcome back to the channel.
David, it's good to be back. Thank you for having me.
You're very welcome. It's been a few months since you were on, and you have been extremely busy. But what I want to do is just for people that aren't familiar with the Sound Money Defense League, can you give me a 30-second or less description of what the Sound Money Defense League actually does? What you do? What's your goal?
Absolutely. So the Sound Money Defense League is a national nonpartisan group that works to remonetize gold and silver. Since 2014, which is when our organization started, what we've found is that the biggest reason that gold and silver are not used as money today is not because they're not good money, but because the government has saddled gold and silver with taxes and regulations and disincentives that make it impossible to function as money. So we go state to state and to Washington, D.C., removing this friction, removing the briar standing in the way from people being able to actually use gold and silver or adopt their own personal gold standard.
Awesome. And then as policy director, what's your function in that then?
Well, executive director, I got a promotion a couple of years ago.
Congratulations.
Thank you. Thank you very much. So going state to state and doing all of the things required of a policy group. Not only do we draft the legislation in many cases, we're also testifying in support of the bill. Many times I travel to testify in support of the bill and to take meetings with lawmakers. We also, one of our greatest assets, honestly, is in coordination with Money Metals Exchange, which is the online dealer that primarily funds the Sound Money Defense League, we're able to activate grassroots using Money Metals customer list. If a project takes place in a certain state, we're able to then blast out an email alert to all of the people that we have in that state with information of committee members, their phone numbers, their email addresses, and many times we pre-type messages. We make it very easy to participate. And that's one of our most powerful tools, the grassroots legislation, being able to activate enough grassroots that legislators and lawmakers actually have to pay attention to the issue is a superpower on the state level. That's ultimately what determines whether or not projects pass or fail. So the grassroots is such a giant part of what we do as well.
And you're having a high degree of success. Tell us about what's happening in Wyoming.
It's been fascinating. And honestly, Wyoming is a great place to start because in a lot of ways, Wyoming is, at least for the Sound Money Defense League, where this started. I think it was in 2017 or 2018 where the Sound Money Defense League worked on a bill, drafted it, and ultimately it passed into law. It became the Wyoming Legal Tender Act. Since then, Wyoming has continually tried to make efforts to expand that act, to otherwise remonetize gold and silver, to otherwise remove taxes on it. And they've done that this year with the passage of Senate File 96. This is a bill that was enacted by the state of Wyoming to establish a physical gold reserve. Wyoming's not the only state that has done this. Utah last year approved a $180 million purchase of physical gold to establish a Utah gold reserve. In Wyoming this year, we established a $10 million reserve with plans on expanding that. So it's a really interesting time because there's a lot of talk as it pertains to the macro when people refer to de-dollarization. There's the concept that adversaries of the United States are looking to de-dollarize. They have too much exposure to dollar-denominated debt, and so they're looking to pivot. And many of these central banks around the world are, in fact, choosing gold. But if you look closer, you'll find that it's United States as well. Municipalities within the United States, states deciding that they also need to de-dollarize, that their balance sheets are riddled with many times debt with negative real rates of inflation. Many times this is third world debt. Many times these are assets that are not benefiting the state. And so to the extent that the state has to invest funds in anything, we should be encouraging them to invest in gold and silver. in many cases, states aren't even allowed to do this. In many cases, because of prudent investor rules, because of permissible investment rules that are governed by the state and the state's financiers, the treasurers or state boards. Many times a state is not even allowed to invest in gold and silver if they wanted to. So there's also on top of mandating in some cases that states establish a physical gold reserve. Another thing we're doing is simply empowering the treasurer to invest in the case that he or she wants to, as a protectant to the state, or for whatever reason, to chase capital gains, to hedge against inflation, to reduce drawdowns. For all of these reasons, gold makes a really interesting and useful part of its portfolio, and states themselves are starting to embrace that.
Now, as we talk, gold is reaching another all-time high around $3,050. Are
Mhm.
you seeing the pace of support for the movement of sound money increasing at the moment? And if so, do you put that down to anything? Is it concern or support for what the administration is doing? Is it the fact that gold is actually hitting a new all-time high? Is it a kind of an education of the powers that be in the various different states so that they actually understand the role of gold in the financial system? What's primarily driving it? And first of all, are you seeing an increase in that support?
It is undeniable that an increase of support is what we're currently experiencing. Like I mentioned, we started this project in 2014. And in 2014, 2015, we were drafting legislation, begging legislators to introduce it. Many of them wouldn't even give a second thought to this. And now in 2024 was our most legislatively successful year of our history, where more than 27 states in the United States introduced more than 65 pieces of legislation to promote sound money. That is huge. Think about what I'm saying there, David. More than 27 states. That's more than 50% of the United States actively considering gold and silver legislation. So a big part of it, if I don't mean to toot my own horn, but a big part of it is the grassroots pressure that we've been able to mount over years and years of focusing on this issue.
Mm.
Another part of it is the education. Simply, it's no longer possible to deny inflation. There have been, of course, as I'm sure you've seen, a myriad of pivots coming from the Federal Reserve and the federal level. So at first, it didn't exist, and then it was transitory, and then it was the fault of Russian oligarchs, and then it was the fault of your grocery store's CEO, and so on and so forth. But people seemingly here in the United States are waking up to the idea that all of those are lies,
Mm.
that this massive printing of money has an effect on the value of the dollar. And so while gold and the price of gold and this recent run up of gold is a great talking point, and it's something that lawmakers, when they go online or they open a newspaper, they see obviously that this is happening. I think it's important to remember that the gold price doing what it's doing right now is a function of all of the mismanagement of money that the federal level and the Federal Reserve have created. This is a proof positive that inflation has taken place, and the price of gold is simply adjusting to all of this new printing. So I think it's important to remember that, yeah, gold is doing this, but what this means is that errors have been made in the past already, and the price of gold is catching up so as to be a hedge against the money printing.
I'm going to bring this back to basics just for anybody that's watching this that doesn't fully understand it. Define for me, first of all, sound money, right? And then secondarily, practically, what is going to be the difference for people in these various different states that are actually embracing this sound money movement?
When we talk about sound money, what we're talking about is a money that has been tested by the market, a money that is subject to market forces over the long term and is able to maintain its purchasing power. Gold and silver for thousands of years have met that criteria. Constitutionally in the United States, of course, gold and silver are the only form of money mentioned in the Constitution. And that is in direct contrast to political money or fiat money. This is money by decree, where a government can simply turn on the printing press or add new zeros at the end of an account digitally and create more money. So sound money it mainly has two most primary value propositions. The first is that Sound money allows you to plan for the future. Making 10, 20, 50, 100-year plans requires a stable money. And so to be able to plan for our future, for infrastructure, for all of the things that increase humanity's standard of living, all of that requires a stable money. The second value proposition of sound money is that it acts as a protectant or a prophylactic against a government that would otherwise grow endlessly, that would otherwise fight wars of choice all around the globe for decades, which is what the United States has been doing. And they are empowered to do so because they have a monetary or a monopoly power over money, right? Money is maybe the most sought after power of all of human history, the power to control money and to regulate money and to determine its value. Governments from the beginning of time have sought this power, and this government has it. And you can see the effects that this has on deficit spending, on Americans and the global economy, and of course on warfare and a bureaucracy that continues to grow. So sound money ideally keeps that from happening. As a question of practical effects, what does this mean? States all around the country are reducing taxes that keep people from using gold and silver. So on the sales tax side, most states have ended a tax on the purchase of precious metals. This means that if a wage earner or a person on an hourly income or a person on fixed income, a retiree, these are the people most subject to the harms of inflation, because inflation is typically guarded against through the use of tangible assets, homes, gold, real estate, things like that. But most people, at least in the United States, that door has been shut for so many. The dream of home ownership is just that. It's a dream. And the prospect of that reality is closed on the face of so many. So what is left? There aren't that many options left of tangible, real property that holds its value while a government continues to debase its money. And gold and silver are that. So allowing people to choose to store their wealth in a time-tested asset without penalty from the government, the state and federal government, is a big part of what we're doing. Also, I think interestingly, on top of the taxes that make it easier for people to use, on top of gold being an asset that states themselves are now choosing to invest in, on top of bullion depositories being set up around the country and various things like that, I think a larger, more macro view of what we're doing is that we allow for innovation. This is an industry that has been slaughtered, it has been held underwater by a government that has hampered its growth. Nobel Prize winning economist F.A. Hayek talks about how money was frozen in its most primitive form. And since then, because of the monetary monopoly that the federal government has on money, we are unable to see innovation in this space. So questions like, wait, what do we want our money to do? What properties make a good money? Do we want a money that holds value, or do we want a money that doesn't do that? These are questions that can now be asked because the reality of them being a possibility is more real than it's ever been. There's innovation in this space on the digital side, on the fractional side, that make it easier for people to actually use gold and silver if they want to.
I want to take it now from the state level up to the federal level. We've had the Scott Bessent talking about monetizing the US balance sheet. Now, most people are taking that to mean that that's going to have some sort of impact and monetizing gold. Gold held on the US balance sheet is held at $42 odd and change. Has been for a long time. So revaluing that is one option for them. In order to revalue, the first thing that they actually have to do is to audit what's being held at this moment in time. Now, a large portion of that is held in FortKnox, or claimed to have been held in FortKnox, as well as in other depositories, mints, and vaults around the country. Talk to me a little bit more about the auditing process on FortKnox and your take on that, because there's an awful lot of rhetoric around and chatter around social media in terms of whether the gold's actually there, how an audit should actually happen, when an audit should happen, and should it be an actual inspection rather than an audit? What degree these things have to be verified, clarified, and authenticated? What's your take on audit in FortKnox?
There's so much to say on this topic, and I think it's important to start with the fact that this mystery remains because of the fault of the United States government, because of their lack of transparency, these questions have arisen. So to be sure, this is not your kooky conspiracy theorist talking on the internet about something that they read online on a discussion forum. These are real legitimate questions surrounding the status of America's greatest monetary asset. A couple of weeks ago, this was fascinating to see happen in real time, where it began with a tweet from Zero Husk, Zero Hedge, the news aggregator, to Elon Musk, that then became a larger conversation, including then President Trump and Senator Rand Paul and Senator Mike Lee, and all of these questions surrounding whether or not the gold is actually there. The Sound Money Defense League has actually been working on this issue pretty much since our inception, since 2014. But notably in 2019 and in 2021, we worked with Congressman Alex Mooney from West Virginia to introduce federal legislation that calls for an audit of America's gold. This is the Gold Reserve Transparency Act. You can find this online on Congress's website. The bill importantly does a couple of things. Originally, Ron Paul, former Congressman Ron Paul in the 90s, introduced a bill that would do something similar to this, calling for an audit. Unsurprisingly, this bill didn't go anywhere. So in 2019, we took that bill and we made some new adjustments to it, so as to make it more powerful and to give it more teeth. And that's what was introduced in 2019 with Congressman Mooney. Now, this bill calls for a full audit or a full inventory, a physical inventory of America's gold. As you may know, the inventories and the quote unquote audits that have taken place regarding America's gold thus far have been made for TV movies. These are dog and pony shows where they bring in a camera, they bring in a couple of congressmen, they open pre-approved containers, they show a look at the bar, and then they put it away and everyone walks away believing that all the gold is safely in Fort Knox. But through all of those theatrics, there was not a single assay. There was not a weighing of a bar. There was not a drilling of a bar, no checking of serial numbers. This in no way counts as a credible or legitimate, certainly not comprehensive audit. So our bill, the federal bill, calls for a physical audit, of course, but it also calls for an accounting, a full accounting of all of America's gold, not just what's stored at Fort Knox, but all of the other places in Denver and in New York and some of these other places. And it calls for a transaction report of all of the transactions involving America's gold. So like you mentioned, there's plenty of chatter on the internet regarding whether or not the gold is there. And again, those questions are legitimate. But to me, the more interesting question is regarding who actually owns the gold. The gold might be there, but has it been swapped? Has it been leased, pledged, otherwise encumbered? Is it owned by the United States? Is it owned by the IMF, the Bank of International Settlements? Even the Vatican potentially has their hands in this. Germany, China, who actually owns the gold that is physically there? Another really important consideration on top of ownership and whether or not it's physically there is the fact that a lot of America's gold, these are coin bars. These are bars that are not liquid. They do not meet global standards for tradable gold. This is gold that was taken because America seized the holdings, the gold holdings of Americans, and many of these coins were minted down into large bars. So they're not pure. They don't meet purity requirements, making them illiquid. So to the extent that America even has this gold, it can't even monetize it. It can't even sell it on the market the way a bullion bank would today. So another important part of this legislation moving forward has to be to include refinement of America's gold so as to make it meet market standards. These are changes that would come to a new iteration of the bill. And hopefully, thanks to all of the attention that is surrounding this issue today, we are hopeful that a new federal bill will be introduced here sooner rather than later on this issue.
If you look at try and join the dots, everything that's going on at the moment in this space, we're seeing massive amounts of gold coming out of Europe, the UK, and Switzerland heading to the States. It has been ostensibly under the guise of getting ahead of tariffs. There's also been a arbitrage opportunity that opened up, which has allowed this to happen an awful lot faster. you take that, the massive movement of gold, you talk about the remonetizing of the US balance sheet, of which precious metals, gold, is the easiest thing to do that. You've also got Judy Shelton talking about 50-year gold-backed bonds. She was Trump's nominee for the Federal Reserve last time round. Still has very got the ear of the president. You talk about the calls for auditing of FortKnox. If you were to draw, if you were to connect all of these dots, now there's a good chance you come up with a circle, you might come up with a square, you might even come up with a giraffe, we don't know. But if you were to draw these dots, connect these dots, are we looking on a federal level at some sort of a monetary reset? Or what's your take on all of that?
I think that Secretary Bassett has made several comments that certainly make people believe this. Of course, you mentioned there's a ton of talk about remonetizing the balance sheet, which a lot of people have taken to mean repricing gold market to mark, or excuse me, mark to market. Those things are all possible, like you mentioned. And like you mentioned, Judy Shelton, Dr. Shelton, has been talking about century-long bonds, having bonds issued by the government payable in gold so as to reclaim confidence in the United States dollar as a monetary instrument. I think that right now that might be the most important thing that can be done. Globally, this isn't, we're not being theoretical here. There are adversaries of the United States who are talking very openly about creating a monetary system that requires that they final settlement in the United States dollar. They're, of course, all coalescing around gold because gold has the properties that you would want a money to have. It can't be politicized. It can't be printed. Excuse me. It's fungible. It's divisible. It's recognizable all around the world. It has a multi-thousand-year track record. So I think that, yeah, potentially what we're seeing here, I hesitate to use the word reset, but what we're seeing here is a change in paradigm. There's a paradigm shift happening with what it means for a government to issue money and what it means for the confidence of that money to be sustained around the world. I think that you mentioned something earlier here about the arbitrage opportunity. And I think that I know that this isn't as, it's not as good fodder for social media, but I think that arbitrage opportunity is a big part of the reason why gold was moving in the volumes that it has been moving over these last couple of weeks. It's very easy to say, oh, look, in preparation for an audit, they're repatriating gold that wasn't there. And I can't say that isn't what's happening, but I think the more likely thing is that there are a lot of bullion banks and a lot of people in this industry who saw that opportunity, that arbitrage opportunity, and took that opportunity to make money. But that said, since 1971, at least here in the United States, the mentality around gold has been to completely sideline it, to shelf it. But more than ever, at least over these last couple of years, we've seen a dramatic increase in stockpiles held by central banks around the world that are actively stockpiling this. We've seen obviously more talk about American gold than we have in decades. So is there going to be a reset? It depends on how you define reset, but I do think that maybe certainly in recent history, there has never been a as close a tie to the American dollar to gold, and just openly having these conversations. The gold is famously a barbarous relic. No one uses it anymore. It's not money. But here we are. Here we are talking about central banks all around the world buying gold, the United States government having to audit and actually check on its own gold holdings, individuals buying gold, certainly in the East, but that's moving toward the West, and then states themselves. So reset, I don't know, but a renaissance of some sort, a re-examination of how gold creates and stabilizes honest money and how that's a crucial, a necessary component to humanity flourishing. Yeah, I think the conversation is more there than it has been, certainly in my lifetime.
Just to connect back to something you just said there about individuals buying gold, particularly in the East, this rally that we've seen over the last 2 years has been primarily driven by central bank buying and institutional buying, and the retail investor has been fairly absent. And the retail investor in the West, whether that's in Europe or the US, has been absolutely absent from this. Why do you think that is?
I think a big part of it is education. I think that there's the zeitgeist here in the West is not to view gold as money. And I think that that stands in direct opposition to how gold is viewed in the West. I don't know if you've spent time, I haven't spent any time out there, but it's fascinating to go out there and see that gold is not, here in the United States, gold isn't even a monetary asset, really.
Mm.
Out West, gold is more than a monetary asset. It has religious significance, it has psychological significance, it has cultural significance. The Asian community largely understands that gold and silver are not useless monetary assets. They're not outdated or a caveman's form of money. There is a reason that from all over the world, absent communication, gold arose as a money across the world. That's because it has the properties that we're seeing. The United States has largely forgotten that, or maybe they have forgotten it, or there was an intentional effort to make sure that the link between an understanding of gold as money is severed. But in either case, the United States here, the Western world, does not have the understanding of gold as a monetary asset, as a cultural asset, that is had in the East. And so, if retail here in the West continues to pick up, I am hopeful that the reason for that would be because people are understanding now that this inflation thing that they've been hearing about for a long time is not theoretical. There is actual benefit to storing some of your wealth, moving it away from this dollar in this Federal Reserve note that is being used and weaponized all around the world to do really heinous things in many cases.
Before we wrap up, JP, where can people learn more about the Sound Money Defense League?
You can find us at soundmoneydefense.org. You can find us on Twitter or X at JP Cortez 27 or at SoundMoneyDef. On our website is contact information. My email is on there. I'm available anytime if anyone wants to speak to anyone hearing this, if you don't mind, David. To anyone hearing this, I encourage you to, if you live in one of these states where the policies might not be as favorable as you would like, I encourage you to reach out to me. I'm happy to work with people in the state who want to bring change to the policies that surround gold and silver in their state.
That's fantastic. I'm going to put a link to those down in the show notes and description below this video. But for now, JP Cortez, thanks for joining us again.
Thank you, David.